They laughed at the cleaner who corrected their math, until the whole university realized she had just solved a problem no professor could crack in 7 years. Who was she? And why did she hide her genius in silence? This is the story of Grace Mitchell, the woman the world ignored until it was too late. At the heart of one of the most respected Ivy League universities, life moved fast. Students ran from lecture halls to labs. Professors talked about theories only a few could understand, and the pressure to be the best sat heavy on everyone's shoulders. But behind the scenes, in the quiet corners of the university, there was another world, a world of people who were rarely noticed. Janitors, cleaners, kitchen workers, people who made sure the school worked smoothly, yet were almost invisible to those chasing success. And among them was a woman named Grace Mitchell. Grace worked in the cafeteria. She wore the same white uniform every day, served food with a gentle smile, and wiped tables when the students left. Most of them never looked her in the eyes. To them, she was just the lady in the kitchen. Nobody ever asked who she was. Nobody wondered what her story might be. But Grace watched, and Grace listened. Every Tuesday evening, a group of math students would sit near the back of the cafeteria, their heads buried in thick textbooks, their voices rising with frustration. One night, Grace was wiping tables when she heard them struggling again. "If the matrix is degenerate, it means it can't be inverted," one said. "But that doesn't help," another snapped. "We need to show why the rank drops." Grace paused, her cloth still in hand. She looked at the whiteboard the students brought with them. It was filled with numbers and arrows. She studied it, then softly said, "Maybe it's because the eigenvalues are all 0. The students froze. One of them looked over his shoulder at her and laughed. "Thanks, ma'am," he said, with a sarcastic smile. "You got a PhD back there in your mop bucket?" The others laughed too. Grace simply smiled and continued wiping the table. She said nothing, but the comments stayed with her. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded her of who she used to be. Years ago, Grace wasn't wearing a kitchen apron. She was wearing a lab coat. She wasn't serving food. She was solving equations that even professors struggled with. Grace Mitchell had once been one of the youngest black women to ever be accepted into MIT's advanced mathematics program. A true genius. But life is not always kind to genius. During her 3rd year, her mother was diagnosed with severe Alzheimer's. The disease was fast and cruel. Her mother began forgetting names, then faces, then how to eat. There was no one else to care for her. So Grace left school. She walked away from her dreams, her research, and everything she had worked for. She got a job, then another, doing whatever she could to pay for her mother's treatment. Years passed. Her mother got worse, then passed away. And by then, Grace was older, poorer, and the world had moved on. She never returned to MIT. The dream was buried, or so she thought. That night, after the students laughed, Grace went home and opened an old notebook she had kept hidden under her bed. The pages were worn, some numbers faded with time, but her mind was still sharp. She began solving the same problem the students had struggled with. By midnight, she had scribbled out 5 lines. 5 lines that explained the entire problem with perfect logic and beautiful simplicity. She stared at the page. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I still got it," she whispered. The next morning, before her shift started, Grace quietly entered the math building. She hadn't stepped foot in there in over a decade. Nobody noticed her white uniform as she walked to an empty classroom, picked up a marker, and wrote those same 5 lines on the whiteboard. Then she left. No name, no signature, just the answer. Later that day, Professor Alan Harris entered room 2C. He had been teaching advanced matrix theory for 20 years. When he saw the whiteboard, he froze. He read the 5 lines once, then twice, then sat down. "Who did this?" he whispered. He called his assistant, then his department head. Soon, the classroom was filled with brilliant minds, all staring at the same 5 lines. "This simplifies the problem in a way I've never seen," one said. "It's elegant. It's perfect," said another. "Who wrote this?" Nobody knew. Word spread quickly across campus. The phantom solver became a mystery. A few students remembered Grace had made a comment the night before. One student, feeling guilty, went to the cafeteria. "Ma'am, was it you?" Grace looked up from behind the counter and smiled gently. "Does it matter who solved it?" she asked. The student's eyes filled with tears. He had laughed at her, ignored her, yet here she was, calm and kind. The truth couldn't be hidden for long. When the professors found out, they were stunned. They invited Grace to speak. She refused at first. "I'm just the kitchen lady," she said. "No," said Professor Harris. "You're the teacher we all missed." They begged her to return, to join the department. But Grace had one condition: only if I can teach everyone, not just the students, the cleaners, the guards, the lunch staff, everyone who wants to learn. The university had never heard such a request, but they agreed. That night, as Grace walked home, she passed a small group of students studying under a tree. One looked up and called out, "Miss Grace, can you show us that trick again?" Grace laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "It's not a trick," she said. "It's just math. It's just life." And just like that, the cafeteria worker became the most respected teacher on campus. Not because she asked to be, but because someone finally listened. Professor Harris stared at the whiteboard like he had just seen a ghost. 5 neat lines, each one flawless. The matrix that had left an entire math department confused now sat quietly solved. No scratches, no second attempts, just clarity. He called over another professor, then another. Soon, the room filled with whispers and gasps. "Who solved this? I thought it was a test question?" "No, it's the real problem, the one we gave up on." But no name was signed. No student stepped forward. The room buzzed with curiosity. Just outside, Grace was washing dishes, the same as every morning. Her hands were soaked. The smell of eggs and onions clung to her apron. But inside, her mind was peaceful. She had done what she came to do. That morning, something unusual happened. 2 students came into the kitchen, one with a phone in hand, the other holding a piece of paper. They smiled awkwardly. Excuse me, were you the one who wrote that solution on the board in room 2C? Grace looked up surprised. "Why do you ask?" "Because it's brilliant, like genius-level math. Nobody else has come forward, and someone saw you walking out of that room early this morning." Grace wiped her hands on a towel. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just said, "It was something I used to love." Then she turned and continued working, as if nothing happened. But the math department didn't forget. They started digging. Old connections. Faculty at MIT. An old journal article with the name Grace and Mitchell on the cover. A paper written over 20 years ago, cited by dozens of scholars. "Wait," a professor said. "This can't be the same Grace Mitchell working in our cafeteria, can it?" But it was. One phone call to a former MIT professor confirmed it. "Yes," the voice on the line said. "She was one of the most gifted students I ever taught." Until she vanished. The head of the university requested a meeting with her. They sent a formal letter through her supervisor, and the kitchen fell silent that afternoon. Nobody had ever seen a cafeteria worker summoned to the president's office. Grace hesitated. She asked for the meeting to be moved. "Not to the president's office," she said. "Let's meet in the faculty lounge, after lunch rush." They agreed. When she entered the lounge, she stood tall. No apron this time. Just a plain black blouse and jeans. Her hair tied back, her eyes calm. They asked questions. She gave short answers. Why did you leave mathematics? My mother got sick. Why not return later? I had bills to pay. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Would you have listened if I had? Silence filled the room. Professor Harris finally asked, "Why now? Why did you solve that problem?" Grace looked him straight in the eyes. Because pain doesn't scream. It waits. And that problem waited long enough. That night, the university's website changed. For the first time, Grace Mitchell's name appeared outside of a staff directory. Her story began to spread. On social media, in student groups, on study forums. People weren't just inspired. They were shocked. How could someone this brilliant be mopping floors while we were arguing over formulas? Students wrote her letters. "You're the reason I want to finish my thesis. I hope I can be half as wise as you. You reminded me that titles don't define brilliance." She kept working in the kitchen, not because she had to, but because it grounded her, reminded her of why she chose sacrifice in the first place. But on Thursday evenings, she started holding short math circles in the corner of the campus cafe. No whiteboards, no tests, just stories and ideas. The room would fill with 15 students at first, then 30, then standing room only. One evening, a shy freshman raised her hand. "Miss Grace, I have an idea, but I'm scared it's stupid." Grace smiled softly. Page 1 is always the scariest page. But without it, there's no book. The girl shared her idea, and it wasn't perfect, but it was original. And Grace clapped louder than anyone. One morning, a small ceremony was held outside the library. A plaque was unveiled. The Grace Mitchell Scholarship, for the unheard voices that deserve to be seen. But she didn't attend that ceremony. Instead, she was in the cafeteria, helping a new worker fold aprons. A few weeks later, the university invited her to give a lecture. She agreed, on one condition. "I don't want a stage. I want a circle. And I want the janitors, the cooks, and the students all invited." They agreed. The room was packed. Students sat on the floor. Professors stood at the back. Some people from the local town came just to see her. Grace stood in the center. No slides, no notes, just her voice. She looked around and said, "You see me now. But I've been here all along. You just didn't look." The world doesn't lack genius. It lacks listeners. I hope you leave this room with ears wide open. Tears welled up in people's eyes. And as they clapped, it wasn't polite. It wasn't formal. It was raw, real. By the time the crowd cleared, one student lingered behind. A young black girl in a hoodie. She approached Grace, holding a notebook. "Miss Grace, I think I solved a part of that new matrix theory. Can you look?" Grace opened the notebook and smiled. "Page 1, the girl nodded. Grace said, "Then let's turn to page 2 together." The story of Grace Mitchell spread far beyond the walls of that Ivy League campus. But it wasn't because she shouted, posted online, or begged to be seen. It was because the truth always finds its way. Especially when it walks softly. After the professors uncovered the full depth of her solution, they did something rare for scholars with big egos. They admitted they were wrong. Not just about the math, but about how they treated her. The head of the mathematics department, Professor Owens, met with the board that same week. He proposed a fellowship in Grace's name, the Grace Mitchell Scholarship, meant for students who showed brilliance but lacked the resources or the background usually expected. He said, "For too long, we've measured intelligence by confidence and missed those who whisper instead of shout." The scholarship was approved in just 3 days. And when they told Grace, she didn't cry. She just smiled quietly, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "Name it after my mother. She's the one who taught me how to solve problems." But the biggest surprise came weeks later. The university asked Grace to give a guest lecture to the math department. It had never happened before. A woman who cleaned their floors now being asked to teach those who once ignored her. At first she refused, not out of pride, but because she didn't think she had anything more to prove. Then one morning, while cleaning the study hall, a young black girl, about 19, approached her. She had seen Grace from afar. She had heard whispers. "I want to study math too," the girl said shyly. "But I get scared. I don't sound like the others here. I don't dress like them. Sometimes, I just feel invisible." Grace took the girl's hand gently. She said, "Then maybe it's time the invisible one started making the rules." And that was the moment Grace decided to speak. The auditorium was packed, not just with students and professors, but with janitors, cooks, security guards, every face that usually stayed in the background. Grace stood at the front, wearing her white kitchen shirt, just like always. She looked around, took a deep breath, and began. "I worked here for 14 years, cleaned your floors, served your food, watched you laugh, cry, sleep, and grow. And for 14 years I listened." She paused, not to the words you said, but to the silence between them. The way some of you doubted yourselves. The way others judged too fast. The way you missed people like me. She pointed at the chalkboard. "I didn't solve that problem to prove I'm smart. I solved it because I never stopped being a mathematician, even when nobody called me one." Tears welled up in the crowd. A few professors lowered their heads. She continued, "There are Graces everywhere. In your homes, your towns, your schools. They wear aprons, uniforms, hijabs, and bonnets. Some speak softly. Some never speak at all. But they see everything. And they carry wisdom like treasure in a locked chest." Her voice cracked just a little. "You see me now. But how many of us do you walk past every day?" And with that, she stepped away. The applause lasted 10 minutes. But more than that, something changed. Over the next year, the university launched a new program, Voices Unseen, inviting all staff members to attend free courses, join research meetings, and share their ideas. Students began greeting kitchen staff by name. Professors started leaving chalkboards in the cafeteria with open questions, not just for other scholars, but for anyone who had a thought. And Grace? She stayed in the kitchen, but not because she had to, because she chose to. She said, "This is my home, my peace. And now, when I walk these halls, I'm not a shadow. I'm a voice." Her portrait now hangs in the math building. Underneath it are simple golden words. Wisdom is listening. One afternoon, that same young black girl from before, her name was Kendra, stood before a chalkboard, hands shaking, trying to explain her theory about circular functions. A professor asked gently, "Where did you learn that?" Kendra smiled. She looked toward the back, where Grace was cleaning a window, and she said, "From someone who used to wipe the chalk dust before anyone noticed the answers were already written." Grace gave her a small nod, the kind only two quiet souls can understand. Because in a world full of noise, the greatest change starts with the ones we refuse to hear. And Grace Mitchell? She was never really invisible. We just forgot how to look.